Thank you and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Development Control and Regulatory Board on this day, Thursday the 16th of November 2017. Might I remind you that everyone present, that this meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council website and will also be available for viewing on the County Council website after this meeting. Thank you. First item on our agenda today is minutes of the meeting on the 14th of September 2017. Are there any questions or comments on those minutes? Would someone like to move them then, please? Dan? Seconded Mr. Crook. Item number 2 is question time. I've received no questions. Item 3 is questions asked by members under standing orders. None have been put forward at this time. Item 4, to advise of any other item the chairman has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda. There isn't anything under that. Item 5 is declarations of interest. Has anyone got any interest they'd like to declare other than it is noted that all members who are also members of a parish, town or district council or liaison committee will have personal interest in those applications which relates to the areas covered on those authorities. Nothing else further. Thank you. Move on to presentation of petitions. No petitions are here to be presented today. Move on to the first item on our agenda then really is item number 7, which is a proposed rail crossing extinguishment order, page number 7. Can I first ask Mr. Crooks to, Mr. Crooks, Mr. Cross.
Thank you, Chairman. I thought for a minute I'd be able to have my sandwiches. I think when those of you who came for the training may recall, I mentioned that DCRB is a good committee to be on because of the range of work you do. And this report that I'm presenting with my colleague Ed McWilliam on my left is an example of a report of something that's not quite the norm, not the sort of report you usually have. It's in connection with a recommendation to you that the path across the railway line shown on the plan, you can see there between A and B, be formally stopped up and a process then be followed. Before I take you through the report, I thought it would just be helpful to just focus on the visuals, so to speak, so that having read the report and looked at some of the attachments, it might be a little bit clearer on the big screen. So Appendix A is what we call the order plan. If the committee agree with the recommendation, a formal order will be made, and this shows the footpath that would be stopped up between A and B. Also indicates, not the best of scales, the situation of the local housing and the locality and the other footpaths in the immediate vicinity and the railway lines, of which there are at least 6 at this location. And I remind members, as you've seen in the report, it's the Midland Main Line. Skipping to Appendix C, this is just an indication of the alternative footpaths in the vicinity. You're involved, or we're involved, in 120 at the bottom, and you'll see the other footpaths, 124, 123, 125 and 137. This will be the larger order plan, if members do the recommendation, showing the location of the other footpaths in a slightly bigger scale. And for information purposes, this is a wider network map of rights-of-way in the vicinity, the rights-of-way being shown by the green lines. And you'll see that in the Barrow Bonsor location, it's not possible to do circuits as such with the footpaths. What you do have to do is you have to make use of the existing road network. So this is a photograph, an aerial photograph taken in 2008, where you can see the railway tracks, the top going from left to right. You can see from left to right at the bottom the main road between Salby and Barrow, and you can see the route over the tracks of the crossing, which, as you'll have seen from your report papers, is a sort of a standard foot crossing up to the height of the running rails. This is a more recent aerial view taken in 2016. You'll have noted from your report that the crossing's been out of action since 2008, and you can see there that obviously no indication anymore of where the crossing was. You can though sort of see in the top left-hand side evidence of walking around part of the footpath network that I referred to previously. It's a bit indistinct, and I think you get from the aerial view, you can see that there's worn tracks there. In your pack, there are a number of the possibilities and alternatives that have been considered over the years, put forward by Network Rail in their discussions with the local people, the parish council, interested consultees, and also landowners who might be affected by any compulsory purchase order that will be required if Network Rail were not able to agree privately with the individuals concerned purchase of their land. And this is option, sort of a sketch and of what option 2/9 might look like. This is a further sketch of option 2/9, looking at how it comes out into the industrial site at Hayhill Lane. This now is a photograph, again showing the location in the last year or so, looking down from Hayhill Lane to the Salby Road. You'll have also seen in the report pack, members, that there's some thought and possibility about looking at the use of a former underpass, and this is just a bigger plan so that you can see it. You'll have seen from the report the technical issues that your officers feel mean that this is not an alternative proposition. But that's just to show you roughly the route. That was then, and this is the position now in terms of what's been built in more recent years in terms of any additions at the railway line and the location to the southerly boundary of the railway line. I don't know why this is heading Cooks with Old Crossing. I found this heading quite amusing. But this again is a historical perspective of further along from where the Hayhill underpass was. And this is the position now. I think we put forward these before and after slides just to illustrate how things have changed with the passage of time and what's been happening on the ground in terms of the configuration of the railway sidings, but also of the addition. Don't know when the houses were, but 3 houses, just you can see there in the top, and if I can get the pointer to work, these 1, 2 and 3, that obviously appeared sometime after the Midland Main Line was constructed, but also after the housing on the main road, but before the crossing was closed in 2008. And in some of the possible land takes, you will appreciate that it's those properties that might see some inconvenience with regard to bridge footings being located or their land being, substantial tracts of their land being taken for any new footbridge, when you bear in mind the possibility of having a footbridge that would work as a bridleway path, so have a gentle slope for horses and the like. Obviously, as I go through the presentation, if members have any questions, can you store them? This is quite a technical report. I'll be happy to take any questions on the legal issues at the end of the report. Mr McWilliam will assist me in terms of any questions with regard to consultation issues and rights-of-way issues generally. I'll just go back to the beginning. I'll start the presentation, if I may, noting that you all are also going to hear public speakers who are opposed to what's being recommended. I understand we have also someone from Network Rail who is in the audience. Can I just check if the Network Rail person is present? Thank you. Who is not obliged to, but may be prepared to assist with any questions about Network Rail's position. But you will appreciate that matters with regard to any discussions of compensation that may have been discussed between Network Rail individuals are matters of privacy, and I would not expect them to be revealed in an open committee session. I think it's also appropriate, if I may say, that this was something, it's been going on for a little while now. It's right to record that while Mrs. Fryer is the sitting member now, Mrs. Fryer, thank you. Mr. Kershaw, the late Mr. Kershaw, was very heavily involved in this matter before his untimely death last year, and he was closely involved in dealing with this matter on behalf of his constituents in the assiduous way that you would recall he acted for. And it's right, I should just pay tribute to him for the work he did to try and get this matter sorted out. I don't want to labour the point, but you'll appreciate from the report that this matter has been going for some time. And really the thrust of this report is to bring it to you members to say that from your officer's perspective, we feel we've gone as far as we can with regard to trying to get a solution. There is no viable solution in terms of our view. We accept what Network Rail is saying to us. So the matter now needs to proceed by the making of a formal order. But the process allows, if there are objections, and we anticipate there will be objections, that the matter will be taken forward to be dealt with and determined by the Secretary of State, who would either hold a public inquiry or decide the matter in terms of written representations. But in my experience of these matters, I would have thought from the issues arising, this would be dealt with at a public inquiry, though it would be for the Planning Inspectorate to decide, because there clearly are issues of concern that perhaps are best tested by a formal inquiry where witnesses can be cross-examined with regard to their thoughts and decisions with regard to what they have done. So I'm starting, if I may, on page 10, part B of the report. Under the heading then at paragraph 13, as well, background, that sort of sets the scene with regard to Bridleway 120. And then in paragraph 14, the incident in 2008, which at the time caused a lot of concern and involved the Railway Inspectorate reporting on the crossing, and their report is attached at Appendix E. A temporary closure was finalised in 2008, and that's remained the same since then. And paragraph 16, the nature of the closure explains why the usage evidence is perhaps what you might say patchy, although paragraph 16 explains why that is. Paragraph 17 then goes into, along to paragraph 22, the various options that Network Rail have considered. And I think the passage of time partly is explained by the on-off proposals, but now off, with regard to Midland Main Line electrification. Matters now precipitated. We now know the government are not going to fund Midland Main Line electrification, which means that we're now in a position to take matters forward. But I know in terms of any issues that you may direct towards Mr McWilliam, he'll be able to perhaps give a little bit further information in that regard. Paragraph 23 recites for you the statutory provisions that have to be considered in the Highways Act when we're dealing with a stopping up of a footpath or bridleway that is crossing a railway line. It's a direct quote from the law, so it is a bit full of legalese. So in paragraphs 24 to 27, I've summarised, or the legal officers either have summarised, what the legal tests require. And there's a making test, and then there's a confirmation test. In the making test, the issue is expediency. As in the confirmation test, it's also expediency, subject to reasonable practicableness, and also arrangements have been made for any closure. So paragraph 28 is the concluded officer view that the stopping up is appropriate. Then from paragraph 29 onwards, we deal with the consultations and responses and what Network Rail have done, because after all, this request is at their behest with regard to gaining views of public opinion And you see the public meeting in Barrow in 2014, and the County Council, its statutory role in terms of seeking views, the consultation it has taken out. And you'll have seen at paragraph 30 and Appendix D, the responses are more or less not favourable to the action the County Council wants, though there is one individual you'll have seen who supports the action. Paragraph 31 onwards then, Chairman and members, is the Officer view with regard to the objections and the analysis that's undertaken on them, and the safety issues that are felt are paramount. Paragraph 34 accepts the view, Network Rail, with regard to the costs involved, and paragraph 36 to 37 is the conclusion that I've referred to earlier, which is that the order should be made. So if I now then turn to the appendices, some of which you've already seen on the screen. 17 then is the order map. Page 20 is just the government guidance that all local authorities, such as the County Council's Highway Authority, have to comply with if they're going to make a rail crossing extinguishment order. Page 21 is the wider network. Page 23 is a summary of responses received that I've mentioned to earlier. Page 24 then is a response on the statutory utilities position. And then from page 26 is the letters received from individuals and groups with regard to their views objecting to what the Council are proposing. I should also add, if we can get to it, that the local authority, that's Charnwood Borough Council, they also object to it. They link their objection to the possibility of residential development to the north of the railway line. Should add, of course, that they have some powers with regard to footpath diversion, but it's not appropriate for them to be exercising those powers because this is a right-of-way matter and it's a matter for the County Council, although the Borough Council clearly are a statutory consultee. I hope you'll have been able to read at your leisure when you had the agenda pack, particularly all the papers that comprise this report, and in particular the Office of Rail Regulator report at page 47 through to 58, with the photograph, not a very clear photograph, I know, of how the crossing was at page 52. Page 59 then is the various, in tabular form, summary of the various options that have been considered by Network Rail with regard to the provision of additional bridging and types of bridging or underpass as the case may be. That also provides, on the extreme right-hand side of the table, the costs involved, and in the penultimate column on the right-hand side, the various issues involved. Then from page 63, we have the Network Rail summary of the various options, what's involved, and the drawings they've done behind each option to try and illustrate the issue. So, taking it on a page-by-page basis, at page 63 we have the option 1, the footbridge on the alignment of the existing crossing with a diversion. Option 2 is the alignment of the Crooks user work crossing further along. Option 3 is same location as the crossing that's now out of action, but an equestrian type bridge. And as I mentioned earlier, anything of that type of nature, equestrian bridge, would require quite a long ramp, and that's shown when you look at the plan. Similarly, when you look at option 4 and the plan attached, and likewise for option 5 and option 6. and option 7. Option 8 then is the possibility of using the old underpass. And option 9 goes back to providing a footbridge at the former Crooks user worked crossing. Page 81 is a picture of the bridge in the Gelson Yard. This is the existing bridge, called Bridge 227. And then this is a montage. I think, Edward, you would describe this in terms of this one?
I think that's fine, just to show what it looked like.
Yeah. So, yes, just for the avoidance of doubt, this is what it might look like if it was located, and this would be a standard form of footbridge. Then there's further options in terms of what Network Rail have considered. Option 11 is then looking at reducing of the line speed and what's involved, and that's their assessment. And option 12 is the miniature warning lights, as whether that is a possibility as well. And again, the reasons why they feel that should be rejected in their view. Option 13 is having a manned level crossing. And again, the reasons why they feel that would be costly. The last page, page 87, is the extract from the definitive map. I've taken you through then the report and the appendices. I'm happy to take any questions on the legal perspective, but I suggest possibly that might be best through you, Chairman, perhaps taken, because we have got some public speakers. Yeah. Might be better at that stage. But perhaps at this stage I could just pause and just ask Mr McWilliam whether there's anything he wishes to add at this stage, or whether he'd like to reserve his comments and perhaps come back after the public speakers.
I think it's probably best to actually reserve saying anything until I've heard the public speakers, because I might be able to pick up both matters in one foul swoop.
Thank you, Mr. Crossan. Thank you, Edwin. We have two speakers today on this item, number 7, Vicky Allen and Mr. Rod Bilston. The time allowed is 5 minutes per each speaker. Could I call on Vicky Allen, please, if you'd like to sit over there, Vicky, and just press the button in the middle of...
Good afternoon. I'm Vicky Allen. I'm President of Leicestershire and Rutland Bridleways Association, which looks after the needs of recreational riders and therefore the businesses that depend on them. I'm asking the board not to consent to this order, as there's been no alternative bridle route provided, and also to look carefully at the Council's equalities policies. The association currently has a database of 560 members. Of these, just 47 are male, so to close a bridleway discriminates against women. Of the 340 or so members for whom I've got age data, 230 are over 50, with a considerable number over 70 and still riding. So discriminating against bridleways and horse riding is also ageist. And the Council also has policies to promote healthy activity. Horse riding and horse keeping, often known as muck shifting, have significant physical and mental health benefits, which can continue into the silver years when many give up on physical activity. A horse needs looking after every day. There's also road safety. In this week's Echo, a report of Charnwood's Road Safety Committee mentions police concern about how motorists behave or don't behave around horses, and bridleways keep horses off roads. I was a British Horse Society trustee and chair of its Access and Rights of Way Advisory Committee for some years. I'm also the Society's National Advisor on level crossings, so I'm well aware of the issues and difficulties at this crossing, from both sides. I've kept horses in the Soar Valley for 30 years, most of those beside Bridleway I-4, which is that way on the map. And I used Bridleway I-20 when it was open 2 or 3 times a week as part of my regular riding circuit. The maps I saw beforehand didn't show it as an essential part of a 5-mile, 1-hour circuit. I also dispute Network Rail's count of horse use, as I always use the telephone, as you can imagine. The crossing closure meant riding 2 miles along the busy, bendy Sileby Road to Barrow, with 2 industrial estates on it, and through the ever busier streets of Barrow, using the one-way system and disrupting traffic for about 20 minutes. The closure also leaves I-20 between Pawdy Lane and the railway as a legal dead end, which fails to contribute to the much-needed riding network. I also know that parallel to that Sileby Road, on the calm field side of the railway, is a strip of land between Bridleways I-4 and I-20, which British Gypsum owns, and is leaving fallow for potential sidings. Gypsum have been operating their plant for the last 30 years without benefit of sidings. Their minerals permission ceases in around 22 years. Is it feasible that they could build and get an economic return on sidings in, at best, 15 years? Would Rail really want 2 sets of sidings on opposite sides of the Midland Main Line there? A bridge over the railway at or near I-20 will cost a minimum of £2 million. A bridle bridge would add 1 or 2 million more. A lower cost option would be to lease this strip from British Gypsum to create a bridleway. This would provide a link between Bridleways I-4 and I-20 for horse riders, an away from traffic link for pupils walking from Sileby to Humphrey Perkins School in Barrow, and a sustainable travel route for Gypsum's workforce in Barrow or Sileby, instead of their current circuitous route by car. There would have to be a commitment that at the end of Gypsum's occupation at the latest, the route would be dedicated as a public bridleway, so that it was a planning consideration in the site's future. I ask the board not to proceed with this order now, but to retain the bridleway rights as a lever to get new Network Rail to negotiate intensively with British Gypsum, and to remember that the council has the power to create bridleways where there's a strong public benefit.
Thank you, Vicky. May I just ask you to remain there just...
I have one point of confusion. You said that this would close the bridleway and there was no other bridleway. Are you saying, therefore, that there is no way that a horse could cross the railway line?
You can go on I-4, you can go under it. That's 3/4 of a mile down the road. I-4 and I-20 provided part of a circuit. You cross the railway twice, once under it, once over it. But it shifts, it destroys the circuit, quite frankly, and we haven't got, and it's about the only public bridleway circuit in Charnwood that's about 5 miles, which is an hour's riding, which is what you've got time for very often.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. Could I ask Mr. Bilson, please, could you take the hot seat? And you have the same amount of time, Mr. Bilson. Jenny will time you.
To be honest with you, I don't think I'll need it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to me. I feel strongly that Network Rail are obliged to provide an alternative route to cross the railway. The original route for I-20 is a route of antiquity, preceding the laying of the Midland Railway in 1894. I feel that Network Rail have not properly explored the reopening of the existing underbridge, which would satisfy all parties. The bridge and its girders are still in situ, and there was a public right-of-way from Sileby Road to Hayhill Valley across the land claimed by Tarmac. This underbridge would be less expensive and less obtrusive than the proposed mega bridges and their double ramps. It would also satisfy the pedestrian access and bridle access. There is a slight problem. We would need to extend the underbridge on the Sileby Road side by about 7 metres to accommodate new sidings that Tarmac have put in. I estimate the span that would be required for this bridge will be about 3 metres and a 7 metre length. It's not mega engineering that, and they are only sidings, not mainline. Network Rail's thrown in the red herring about the possible spur to Hayhill Industrial Estate. I agree with Vicky. The mine's been running long enough, they're not going to put a siding in there. And if they do need to, then they'll have to pay for whatever requirements there are to allow us to extend the bridle path through British Gypsum's land, which would be about 400 metres, and then dive down under the underbridge. I think it's about time now, really, that Network Rail got on with the job and stopped finding reasons not to spend any money and get on with it, please. I rest my case.
Thanks very much. Any members of the panel got any questions for Mr. Bilson? No. Thank you very much, Mr. Bilson. Thanks for coming. I'd like to now come back to Edwin then, please, if you've got comments you'd like to make on what's been said and any further comments, please.
Yeah, just picking up on the first speaker, and I think as Anthony alluded to earlier on, unfortunately, because of the crossing being closed so rapidly following the survey, the only records that we actually have are supplied by Network Rail of the use of the crossing, and at that stage linked to people actually ringing through to the signal box. Now, that is on item 16 on page 10 of the main report. I have to say, from that information, it's estimating about 40 people using crossing per day, some and cyclists, and then at the end, it's at that point, it's saying that there's only about one horse rider per week going across. I can't comment any further on that. That's simply the only user information we've actually got. Just as a point of information, going around the path on the carriageway, I think it amounts to 1 mile in terms of the distance actually concerned. And as regards, can I just borrow the zapper, that's the one. If I come back again, I think Anthony alluded to this as well, coming back specifically, because to be fair, it has been raised. The Hayhill Underpass, again, I'm not an engineer. I don't know what condition it's in, how it's been infilled. You'll see when it did exist, it had 4 tracks of the main line spanning the route. Network Rail have informed us that it's just simply not possible in engineering terms, broadly, rather than anything else. It's now 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I think, and it'd have to be at least double the length now. And also, it comes up in the main granite transfer area for Lafarge there, which obviously is a very busy actual area. And I assume as well the cutting's been filled in, but really I can't comment any further on that. That's the information we've been given, and so we have accepted, in terms of officer information, that that's not actually possible to reinstate in a meaningful context. I'm really open for any other queries from members.
Mr. Cross.
I just thought it would help, Chairman, members. You've had some additional information as well, I think, in terms of some extra information. It might just be helpful if Edwin just perhaps commented on some of those aspects. You've had 1 or 2 letters so that you've got the officer response on those as well, and then that should help inform you then with regard to the debate that will follow, if that's all right with you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Well, if I may, I'll deal with these as together, because the points raised by the Leicestershire Footpath Association and the Ramblers Association cover the same areas. There is a specific point raised relating to usage of the crossing and how much we should bear in mind when making a decision. I have to say, I believe in terms of the wider context of government advice that usage of the crossing must be something that members can consider and look at in terms of the crossing. It just makes common sense that that's the case. If there are 1,000 people using crossing a day or 2, I think we'd have different views specifically on the matter. And I think also I've spelt it out quite clearly that we don't have detailed information about previous usage of the crossing other than that survey that's been supplied to us. The next issue relates to appropriate notices during the closure period, and indeed the state of the carriageway being used as an alternative with people parking on pavements, etc. Again, I just come back to the common sense point that this has been the situation for 9 years. I've looked through our reports, and this really hasn't been a strong issue that has caused any concern locally. The next one is around misuse, and it also relates to how in which some elements of the report have talked about misuse of the crossing and concerns. I don't think there's anything more I need to add, because this is completely noted. I think if we're coming back to the crossing is unique in Leicestershire. I know a lot of level crossings, including for PARs nationally. Can't say I've come across one like this other than on the East Coast main line. And I think the inspector's report is so clear about the danger and the obvious reasons for that. I don't need to go any further into that. There are then some general comments about the bridge options and some queries, I think, relating back to the reasons set out by Network Rail themselves. There is a representative at the meeting. I'll just briefly go through a couple of those, if I may. There's one critique that a number of the options are citing poor public support as one reason for the closure. And they're saying with such a variety of users, it would be impossible to provide a clear-cut option which all would support. One thing on which all users agree is that an alternative crossing away from the roads is preferred to total extinguishment. I'm just going to ask my colleague, because obviously they've given us the information back in terms of the various options available, and I'll just ask, could he confirm that Network Rail's position is still that they do wish to progress with this order, and that they don't feel that any of the current options as laid out in the report and as stated in the report are options that they can proceed with at this point in time?
Yes, that is correct.
Network have just confirmed that this remains their point of view in terms of this. Another point that has previously been raised as well is by Mr. Cross is that should an order be made and then published, this is only the next phase of this process, and that process would then mean that it's open for public consultation, and the likelihood is, I would suggest, that some people may not be happy with that order and may may object to that order, at which time it'll go through to the Planning Inspectorate and will actually provide an opportunity both for the user groups I've just been reading out from to make their representations, and also allow for Network Rail to set out in detail why a number of these proposals couldn't actually be taken forward at this point in time. I think that's about all I have to say on the letters points that have been raised.
Okay, thank you, Edwin. Now it's now open to members. David Jennings.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We have to make a decision. I'm the first one to admit that I do not like the prospect of this being closed. But it is closed. It's been closed for 9 years. Now, if we were to vote for the recommendation to make an order this afternoon, as Mr. Cross has explained, it is advertised, and I think it just takes one objection and then it goes to a public inquiry, so it puts it in a different realm, and that everyone who has an interest will have the opportunity to put their case. So I think what we should do this afternoon is to approve the order to close, and I so move, Chairman.
I'll second.
Did you want to speak, or was you just seconding it, or was you going to speak? Which were you?
I was seconding the proposal.
Mrs. Taylor, followed by Mr. Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think there's any doubt from any of us that the evidence shows that this crossing is unsafe and something needs to be done. I am concerned about how it's took this long to actually get to this point, and things have developed. Lines have been put in, buildings have been erected, and I think if it had been addressed a lot earlier, then we probably wouldn't be in this position. I don't want to see this crossing closed. I want to see some alternative put in, and I think I agree with the proposal that the only way we can do that is to support this order today, and hopefully someone will object and it will go to a public inquiry, and I think that seems the best route for this to go to, that everyone has a chance at a public inquiry to put their views across, and hopefully it will be that some alternative is found to support keeping the crossing open. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Dan.
Thank you, Chairman. I am concerned at the time of all of this. The length of time seems very inappropriate, and it's a sort of wearing down, the attrition of any objectors that have nearly gone away or died. It's only a short period of time in reality, but 9 years is a long time. What concerns me also is the lack of evidence, because we have 9 years now and nobody's watching people go over and counting, and so the whole thing just slips away under sight. And when I heard about the problems with the Underpass, and British Rail saying, no, I don't think it's engineeringly possible yet. We went under the Channel Tunnel and we do all sorts of amazing things with Crossrail in London. You know, it just doesn't really seem right. Now, I support my colleague, Councillor Jenkins, that it's probably the right way to go forward. But what worries me, and I'm saying it quite openly, there could be this procedure. But believe me, British Rail will turn up with a team of barristers, silks, all laid out ready to fight the case, and the public will turn up on their own or individually, or somebody might be able to put a few bob together to get a solicitor or somebody to represent them. I just feel fearful that I don't have the 100% confidence, not in people's integrity, but I just know that it will be one-sided when it does come to this, and people will object and they will have a chance to speak, but they will not have much more evidence than they've got. But British Rail will, the track people will have the upper hand. So I do feel concerned. I know this afternoon we cannot answer that, but I think I will go with this because there has to be some resolution. But I feel very concerned about the whole thing, and I think as a body, as an entity, we need to be looking to the future and spotting some of these that is going to slip by. And the public's interest, historically, that's been there for many, many years. Perhaps it was well there before the railway lines came in, and it just disrupts what
we had in the countryside where people can walk and ride a horse, and I just feel so sad that we're not sort of got on top of this a lot sooner, but it was never designed, I don't think, Chairman, for us to ever have that opportunity. So I rest my case. Thank you.
Before I come to you, Michael, can I just bring Anthony back in, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I just want, I really want to allay fears and understand where Mr. Harris is coming from. And I apologise, I should have introduced my colleague Pauline Pritchett, who's sitting behind me. Pauline, right, so, who deals with all the administration in connection with footpath orders. And Pauline and I were involved in a public inquiry on a confirmation issue of a rights of way a couple of years ago. So it was the Council Against Individuals. And I'd like to reassure people that the inspector gave everyone a thoroughly hard time. The inspectors are totally independent, and they will not be fazed at all by people producing silks or senior barristers or experienced rights-of-way solicitors. The inspector will be an experienced rights-of-way professional who will want to hear the evidence and will then make his or her decision based on the evidence and what all parties have put to the inquiry. So although I can understand an obvious concern, it's quite it's a fair process, and also, as it's a process, if the inspector gets it wrong, you can go off to the courts and say there's a process failure, just as with any decision that the County Council makes. So there are checks and balances in the system. The other point I'd like to make is, and I perhaps didn't develop this perhaps as fully as I should have done, with regard to the time aspect, that's all been linked in part to what's been happening with the Midland Main Line and whether electrification would or would not be taking place, because that determined really the height of any sort of footbridge and any cost that would be involved if it had to be higher, for example, to take account of any overhead wiring. It's only in the last few months that it's become clear from announcements by the government that they're saying it won't be supported or won't be funded, that it's been clear that nothing is going to happen with regard to that aspect. So it was right to bring this matter to the board, to get a decision to take it forward. I certainly agree it's taken longer than it should have done, and for that, of course, the council would wish to apologise through me for the delays, but it's not been the council sitting on its heels, so to speak. It's been as a result of the circumstances we've been faced with. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Anthony. Thanks for that extra information. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with Mr. Cross. I think if it goes to the inspector, we'll get an absolutely balanced and fair judgment, whichever way that falls. No problem there at all. I do share the concern over lack of evidence. We seem to have this report from the HM Principal Inspector of Railways, which at the end of his report has got many recommendations, which of course none of them, I believe, were implemented. No doubt this was a risky crossing, no doubt at all, but it was poorly managed. The evidence of usage, because of the length of time, I mean, we've done footpaths and rights-of-way here before, and we have had pages, nearly a ream of paper before us, of usage, anecdotal evidence from all sorts of parties and people telling us the usage, the timing, who uses it, what sort of people. None of that seems to be here. It's based solely on one inspector's report. I also would have thought if there's a history of unsafeness there, injuries, fatalities, near misses, there's none of that apart from the one incident which led to the inspector coming in. I find that a little concerning. We had a similar case up on Kilby Bridge. A new crossing was put in there over the Midland Main Line. And the usage there is very, very small. It really is. But Network Rail felt it was justified to spend a considerable amount of money there for what probably was smaller usage than this. Now, either money's got very tight or there's a change in an approach. But the evidence was built up there, the usage was done, and the justification was all done. Because of the length of time and the length of closure, we've not seen any of that here, which makes me very unsettled. And I think if we do go ahead with the order, I think it more or less gives credence and justification to Network Rail not doing anything. I think there is a solution here, and hopefully the inspector will see that and actually say to Network Rail, there is a solution, work on it, work with the people that want this. So for that reason, I'll probably abstain. I've no doubt this is a very unsafe crossing, 7 lines or something. high-speed trains. But, you know, the lack of evidence, the length of time, it just, you know, I've rarely seen something come before us with so little detailed information.
Thank you, Michael. Edwin, you'd like to come in again?
Yeah, just to pick up on several of the points you've made. Yes, it is a very dangerous crossing, undoubtedly the most dangerous in the county. And then just to reiterate, in part the frustration of not having that information directly to hand is always frustrating as an officer due to the rapid closure of the route. And again, just to confirm to you that we have, over the last few years, in conjunction with Network Rail, replaced 5 crossings with 4 bridges. Indeed, one of the crossings, I think, is one of the longest, if not the longest, bridge in the county at Allsops. And that's just to reaffirm that I don't believe that Network Rail have moved away or have a fear of providing a replacement, because they have done so on every other crossing we have worked with. I believe on this instance it has been the challenges of the site and providing alternatives, and the other parties they are actually working with, if you like, and the overall costings. The other thing is, and this isn't perfect, I have to say, and the first speaker was pointing this out, there is at this particular point an alternative with a carriageway and footway to go around. One of the challenges that faces us, and of course Network Rail and other parties, where there might be quite a remote footpath crossing a railway line, which will cost a lot of money to bridge, there is simply nowhere else to take the footpath. The other crossing points may be half a mile away, so as a result it tends to get a bridge, ironically, and it's also easier to put in than in a situation like this. So I would, to be fair to Network Rail, I would underline the fact that they have, in all other instances, successfully delivered on bridges, and hopefully they'll finally successfully deliver on the last one at Little Bowden in the south of the county as well, that we've been working with them on this. On this particular site, it seems it hasn't proved possible for the company to proceed.
Thank you again, Edwin. Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm disappointed. I don't like to close any footpath at all. I think it's important we keep as many open as possible. However, this one is rather different, isn't it? It's on a very fast main line. We've got the inspector's report where he said it was the most dangerous he'd come across. That's not changed. Speed of traffic's increased since he did that 9 years ago, I would imagine. I think the only way forward, as we say, is to close it and let the inspector come to a decision. But I, for one, would like to see the underbridge explored more. I think that's about the only option that is available that is practically, I don't believe, involves any compulsory purchase orders for any land, which also delays things for years as well. So I agree with the recommendation in this instance that the only person who can actually make this happen is the inspector at a public inquiry, because he can cross-examine the witnesses that we can't do this afternoon, which I'd really like to do, especially British Rail, but I can't do that this afternoon.
Mrs. Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarity. If I would like this to go to, I don't support the order, but I would like it to go to a public inquiry. So the only way I can do that is to support the order. So if the committee does support this order and it goes out to public consultation, how will the County Council be going to the public inquiry? Will they be supporting the closure or not supporting the closure?
If the committee approve the recommendation, that is the committee approving the recommendation to stop up, close the footpath. I take the view, though, that because the legislation is facilitating and it's not it's Network Rail that require the closure, that I'd be advising Edwin that the stance to be taken would be that the County Council at the inquiry would facilitate the inspector hearing the evidence that Network Rail would have to adduce to persuade the inspector that the statutory tests that you've seen in your report have been made out. So the County Council's view would be dependent on what you decide now, but if I take the sense of how the meeting is, that the officer recommendation is supported, but with reservations with regard to the lack of evidence thus far you feel has been provided by Network Rail, then it would be incumbent on the County Council in its presentation before the inspector to ensure the inspector was aware when it made its decision the County Council had some reservations along the lines I am suggesting. So that's really... So it would be, in a sense, neutral, but verging towards concern, which I suppose that's lawyer speak, but if you want a frank answer, it would be members at the board were extremely concerned about the evidence adduced. They weren't able to test it out as you can, Inspector. The evidence Network Rail provided was sufficient for the officer considerations, and in a sense we were supporting that. So it would be just to make the inspector aware that there were concerns, and of course the minute of this decision would be before the inspector as part of our paperwork, so the inspector would see in advance, because they always get the paperwork in advance, what the committee's deliberations were. But I should also say to you, that's obviously an important aspect that you want to put before the inspector, but the inspector looks at the position at the inquiry, having heard the evidence from Network Rail in particular as to why the engineering issues or the compensation issues, impact on the purchase and all the rest of it, outweigh any other consideration. So I hope it's rather a long answer, Mr. Chairman, because I don't want to over-egg the pudding in terms of what you might decide, but I hope that just helps you. So the inspector would be aware there were reservations about the decision.
Mrs. Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. And can you just advise what the way forward would be if the committee didn't support this order today, please?
Well, through you, Chairman, Network Rail would probably come back to us with a request for a further temporary form of closure to keep it closed, and they may well consider some form of action to protect their position. And with a Network Rail representative here in front of the committee, you'd understand I don't want to say too much about it in terms of what I can say to you about what we might or might not do. But I think the crossing would remain closed. It would not be reopened, and an emergency form of closure would be sought, which the officers would have to consider in the light of what's being said, but would have to take the decision based on an officer view about what was the right way to proceed. And because this crossing has been closed since 2008, I think you'd understand that the crossing would remain closed because the infrastructure at either side isn't there. But a process would have to be followed. And of course, it is right. You are right to raise the question, Mr. Edder, because it is up to the committee to make the decision. It's an officer recommendation before you, and you are free, of course, either to accept it or reject it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Cross.
On point of order, Chairman.
Yes.
Would this video recording be presented as evidence to the inspector at any public inquiry if it should take place?
I think the answer, Mr. Bolter, would be that the inspector would be made aware of what happened at the committee. It would be for the inspector to decide whether he or she wished to look at the video, look at the webcam or not, as the case may be. I think the inspector would probably take the view. I can see the council's committee spent a good time deliberating on this, but the decision is now a matter for me to take. That's the inspector, and I don't really need to see what's gone before. I need to hear the evidence now. So I would have thought the inspector might be interested, but might not pay too much heed to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you, Chair. I do think, listening to the debate, that the footpath is going to remain closed, whatever. If we didn't go with the proposal this time, it would still remain closed, and there would be no definitive way of solving this. And I think the best way is for it to go to the public inquiry, because then the inspector can actually give a definitive answer on this.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. I think that's probably the best solution. If there's no one else wants to speak, it's been moved by David Jennings and seconded by Mrs. Richardson. All in favour of that?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's 9.
4 and 1 abstention.
Is anyone against?
No against? No. Thank you very much. Thank you, Edwin. Thank you for coming. Right, item number 8 is a application to remove a tree. Mr. Shaw will deal with this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The purpose of this report is to consider an application by Mrs. Wilkinson of Lime Tree House, Old Hall Lane, Lubbenham, to fell a Lombardy poplar tree located on her property. The reason for the proposal is that she is concerned that the tree is a danger, in particular to her neighbours, by the fact that it is of a large size, over 30 metres in height, and has some dead wood in the crown. A climate inspection of the tree was undertaken by George Walker Tree Care, and found that the unions of the multi-stem tree at about 5 metres were found to be sound. But the report concluded that as the tree was 30 metres in height, over mature with dead wood, and that the neighbouring property is within 10 properties are within 10 metres of the tree, it would be appropriate to consider the future retention of the tree. The recommendation is that consent is granted to fell the Lombardy poplar tree, subject to the planting of a replacement small leaf lime tree. The reasons for the recommendation is that the Lombardy poplar is in close proximity to residential properties, and at 70 years old it has reached the end of its safe life expectancy, and the tree is potentially dangerous. The planting of a replacement lime tree will mitigate the moderate loss of amenity in time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. We have no comments from Dr. Bremer, who is the division member, and we have no external speakers. Michael, you want it?
Move the recommendation, Chair.
Sorry, all in favour of the recommendation? Okay.
Yes, just announce that's passed for the website.
Fine.
You can say that that's a result.
Yep, okay, that's passed then. Thank you. Application to fell a tree. Mr. Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an application by Mr. Abramson of 36 Hollis Way, Thurmby, to fell an oak tree located on his property. I'd just like to point out that consent was granted under delegated powers in September this year to overall reduce the crown by up to 3 metres and thin out the crown and clean out dead wood. This work has not been done. Wrong way, sorry. Don't know what's happened there. No, we've lost it. Yeah. Thank you very much. You've got the touch, Lonnie. The parish council has objected to the removal of the felling of the tree on the grounds that the tree contributes to the amenity of the area and appears to be stable in the ground. It is recommended that consent is refused to fell this oak tree on the grounds that the oak tree appears stable in the ground and that the removal of the tree will have a detrimental impact on the amenity of the area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. No comments received from Mr. Galton. The recommendation is to refuse this application, which is on page 99. Mr. Bolter. All in favour then? That looks to be unanimous. Thank you very much. We're on 10 now, are we? Moving on to item number 10, which is a application to move clay from one part of the site to the other at Ellistown Quarry, Whitehill Road. Lonnie, you're dealing with that, Whitehill Road, Ellistown, I should say.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just the location there for you on the plan to show you where the quarry is. Here, I'll show you the existing extent of the permitted clay extraction is in here. The existing clay stocking from that site is stored here and then fed into the factory in here. This is another factory which is making concrete blocks and the like. Here is the Amazon warehouse, and then there's some other industrial estates there, just to give you the context. And what they're trying to do is to make room for the infilling, which was granted consent 3 or 4 years ago. The infilling of construction material, inert soils and wastes, is going very fast because of the amount of development that's happening around the county, which is caught up with the extraction of clay. So the request is that can they take out the clay in this section, stock it here, ready to import it into the factory. That stocking clay will take about 2 or 3 years to reduce down as they feed the factory. There is no room on this stocking area to stock that. So the request is, can they stock here temporarily while they take the clay out, backfill, and then reduce that. They will then continue extracting clay here as per the planning consent. You'll see also from the report that there's a bridleway which was put in as part of the previous consent. They will put a bit of screening on the front here. It won't totally screen the 5-metre clay bund, but it'll soften it a little bit, but it'll only be there for temporary. This is a working quarry, and the photographs just shows you roughly what it looks like. Looking from the road, you can just about make it out there where they've drawn in what the stockpile will look like. And the quarrying is on the other side there, and this is looking back the other way. Again, it'll be within this area here. So there has been one letter of representations. They're not objecting. They're just concerned about noise controls, and the recommendation is that all the controls that are currently there will be repeated in this consent, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Lonnie. Danny, it's your ward. Would you like to comment first?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've received no complaints from the parish council, from members of the public. I view this as a win we're not having lorries carting stuff through narrow roadways and creating more problems. I think this is a brilliant solution. Obviously helps the quarry, but it's also sensible that it's within the quarry confines, and so it doesn't disrupt individually roads that could do. So I think that's fantastic. There is reference to the noise and the decibel. It always makes me smile because they say the decibel will only be this and at 80 would be the highest. But I mean, we all know it all depends on the prevailing wind out, and the strength of that wind on what your decibel you get. But clearly, having looked at it and talked to people, I see no problems with this. Very happy to propose. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Would anyone like to second, Dan? Would anybody else like to speak on this item? Looks like no. Well, it's been moved and seconded then that we permit this. All in favour? That looks like it's unanimous. That's passed. Jenny? Moving on to item number 11, which is the proposal to use a sewage pumping station, erection of 2 kiosks and associated works. Lonnick.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Location of Stanton under Barden, as you can see from the plan there, in a village stuck between 2 quite large quarry operations. Apologies, the sun is shining on the overhead slide now, so it's quite difficult to see. But this sewage works. It's a pumping station underground with a couple of kiosks, and it's in relation to a housing development which was granted in outline a few years ago and is currently going through reserve matter approvals. That's the housing estate, and allied to that there's a small bit here which is what you're considering, which is the sewage pumping station and kiosks. So fairly small part of the overall scheme, which is dealt by another planning authority. So it is a bit odd in that respect that you're dealing with this and another planning authority is dealing with the main scheme. But it's fairly minor operations. What you're looking at is to allow access here, kiosks, and then there'll be an underground pumping stations with some equipment to get access to that underground pumping station. There has been one objection to it, but that is sort of related to the housing development, and there's a school next door. You'll see the access road for the housing estate will also be the access road for the sewage treatment works, and there was some concern about the safety of schools. And from the report you'll see that there has been a look at how lorries will turn into here, and big lorries will have to cross on the other side of the carriageway to get down here. But from the report you'll see that the only large tanker that will go to this site will be once a year. So on that basis we thought the risk was acceptable, and there'll be very little activity in and out of the site in any event, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Lonnie. Mr. Bedford is a division member. We've had no comments from Mr. Bedford. I'll throw it open to members. Mrs. Taylor.
Just one quick question. It says in here there'll be no smell or dust or anything like that. Will there be any noise created by this from the underground that will be heard at all?
I don't know that. You mean in terms of the machinery underground? All I can say will be no more than any other pumping station. So, I should imagine it wouldn't be that noisy because it'd be underground. There will be machines, obviously, and pumps, but I suspect they'll be so far underground and quite far removed from the residential properties there that I don't think it'll be a problem, Chairman.
Well, it's been moved by Tony Gillard and seconded by Mr. Jennings. All in favour? Another unanimous, Jenny. You're doing... Oh dear. Oh, I wouldn't dare say that. Right. Item number 12, which is Lount Recycling Centre in Lount near Ashby-de-la-Zouch. Lonnick.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, this is an application to you to extend the temporary consent that currently exists on the composting site. So what you've got quite a large composting facility located here, but there's also a household waste recycling centre here, which has got a permanent consent, but a smaller activity, as you can see, and not very clear here, but there is a gas engine which takes gas from the landfill site, which was on the back of a former large open cast coal site, and then it was backfilled with waste, and there's gas still coming out of there. The site has been restored. This site was originally granted temporary consent back in '98, and it's had a number of temporaries pending the relocation of this to a more suitable and more sustainable location. Most of the green waste coming here comes from Loughborough, Shepshed and Colville, so they travel right across the county to this site. The County Council's waste disposal arm clearly lets the contract and would like for this to be more sustainable, but it has to let the contract to whoever comes forward with the best facility. And currently this is the only facility in this area that can take all this. From a planning point of view, a little bit concerned for the continuation of this, because what we'd really like to see is this in a location that's better suited to where the waste is arising, and see this site restored back to how it should be. Having said that, we are recommending another extension, but not as long as they've asked for, just shorten it a little bit in order to keep it quite tight. So they've asked for 2025 and then 2 years to restore. What we're saying is you can go to 2024, which is 5 years after the next contract round, and then probably 16 months for you to restore it, which we think is enough time. So that'll bring it up to 2025. So it's sort of not too much longer than what they've got now, Chairman. So on that basis, recommending approval, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Crooks.
Thank you, Chairman. I notice from the report that the other 5 sites, which would have been an option, are up to capacity. Do we know if the county are actively seeking a replacement for this one? Otherwise, 3 or 4 years down the line, we're going to be in the same position as we are now.
Mike, would you?
I suppose the County Council corporally is aware that this is a time-limited site, Chairman, so it'll be a matter for that part of the County Council to understand that this is not, if you agree to grant another temporary consent, it is on the basis of temporary consent, and they should be seeking to find an alternative site. So I think the County Council is aware what it has to do. I think that's the best I can put it, Chairman.
Okay. This is in, well, it is in the site is in Councillor Rushton's division, but it's actually on my doorstep as well. I've always found it to be a clean and well-run site. I mean, you do get the odd odour from it, but it operates well and it provides a good service for where it is. Would anyone like to speak on it or propose something?
Move it, Chair.
Second. Okay. Move and seconded, Jenny. That all in favour? That looks like unanimous again then, Jenny. Sorry about that. I'll start again. The agenda item 13 is on page 155, 56, 57, 58 and 59. Would someone like to move that we receive them? And all in favour? Item number 14, agenda item 14, which is on page 161. Sorry? Anthony.
I don't want to take Lonnick's thunder on this one, Chair, but you'll see it's a breach of condition notice all at the same place on the Heather Brickworks, and having spent a bit of time with planning colleagues dealing with this, I was a bit shocked to receive what I would describe as a bit of a fizzer in terms of a very aggressive letter from a well-known firm of solicitors telling us that we got it all wrong, threatening a judicial review. Anyway, we had a look at it again and decided with Lonnick's colleagues that we had got it right, and we've written back to them and they've gone away. So they won't be challenging the decision, and hopefully the action that Lonnick's team are taking will actually help the position in this location, although it is now a matter for North West Leicestershire District Council, because the planning issues now arising are more District Council matters than they are for the County Council. But I thought to complete the meeting that you'd be pleased to know that we're taking some very strong enforcement action on the minerals planning consent, and we've not backed down because we know that we're right. And just to make sure we were right, we went to then to go to, at some expense, to an expert barrister who agreed with what we were doing. So I don't know whether Lonnick wants to add anything on that, but I thought you'd like to know, members. Thank you, Chairman.
Oh, thanks for coming in with that extra information, Anthony. The next item is item 15, any other items which the Chairman has decided to take as urgent. Well, there isn't any of those. And item 16 is Chairman's announcement. And as usual, thank you very much for coming. And I'll close the meeting.
Chairman, will you permit me a word? Say how nice it is to have Jenny Bailey back with us, even if it's only for a guest appearance.
Well,
very welcome, Jenny. Thank you.
Yes, it's nice to see you, Jenny.